Hey everyone, welcome back today. Today we're uncovering 12 damn pieces of evidence against Scott Peterson that recent documents completely left out. Let's dive in.
I was totally expecting to go home that day. I was staggered by it.
Peterson was sentenced to death in 2004 for the 2002 murders of his wife Laci and their unborn son Connor, after their bodies washed up in San Francisco Bay, near where he said he'd gone fishing months earlier.
I certainly regret cheating on Laci.
There is a massive movement pushing the idea that Scott Peterson was completely railroaded by the media. The narrative points back to that A&E documentary from 2017, demanding you to believe there was absolutely zero forensic evidence linking him to the murder of his pregnant wife. The thing is, when you pull the original court files and read through thousands of pages of trial transcripts, the reality shatters that illusion. What I found was a deliberate campaign to manipulate the truth. In this investigation, we are going to break down the exact 12 arguments used by his defense team to claim his innocence. We will look at the concrete anchors, the alibi, and the missing biological evidence they swore did not exist. So, now we really have to ask the ultimate question. What if the documentary lied to us? Could this be the biggest scam ever? The defense team and their supporters always start with the exact same argument. They claim the entire case against Scott Peterson was purely circumstantial. They say there was no murder weapon, no immediate crime scene, and no direct eyewitnesses, which in their minds proves he is an innocent man. But the reality of the criminal justice system is very different. The idea that circumstantial evidence is somehow weak is a complete myth created by television shows. Circumstantial evidence is actually incredibly powerful when you connect the dots. Just look at the Robert Durst case. He avoided justice for over 15 years. When he was finally caught, there was no murder weapon and no biological evidence tying him to Susan Berman. The prosecution convicted him using a letter and a misspelled word. That was entirely circumstantial evidence, but it was absolutely airtight. A mountain of circumstantial evidence can be much stronger than a single eyewitness. So, we need to look at what the police actually had in front of them before we blindly judge their overall investigation. This brings us directly to the second major argument from the defense. They insist the Modesto police unfairly targeted Scott from the very beginning and completely ignored all other possible suspects. They paint a picture of lazy detectives who just wanted to blame the husband because it was easy. But when you actually look at the initial police reports, you realize the police did not just randomly decide to target him. They zeroed in on him because his behavior on the very first night was completely inexplicable and highly suspicious. Let us walk through the exact timeline of that afternoon. Scott claimed he returned home from his fishing trip at the Berkeley Marina and found his house completely empty. His pregnant wife was nowhere to be found. Her car was still parked right there in the driveway. Her purse and keys were still inside the house. What struck me here was what Scott did next. He did not immediately run over to the neighbors to frantically look for Laci. He did not drive around the block searching for her. Instead, he casually walked inside, took off his clothes, and threw them directly into the washing machine. Then, he grabbed a slice of pizza, poured himself a glass of milk, and took a shower. He sat around in an empty house. And then, he finally made a phone call. He called his mother-in-law, Sharon Rocha, to ask if Laci was there. He calmly told her Laci was missing. But the most chilling detail of all is what he did not do. He never once tried to call Laci on her cell phone. If you truly believed your pregnant wife was just out running an errand or visiting a friend, your very first instinct would be to call her direct line. He did not make that call because, logically, he already knew she was not going to answer. At this point, the police arrived at the house. They were just treating it as a standard missing person case. They asked normal questions. But Scott kept offering strange information that nobody asked for. He eagerly handed them a parking receipt from the marina, completely unprompted, to solidify his alibi. He wanted to prove exactly where he was. Then came the moment that completely shifted the focus of the entire investigation. It happened just a few short hours after Laci was officially reported missing. The police were still hoping she might have just wandered off or had a medical emergency somewhere in the neighborhood. They were actively organizing search parties. Out of nowhere, Scott asked Detective Brocchini a question that stopped the detective dead in his tracks. Scott directly asked if they were going to bring in cadaver dogs to search for Laci. Think about the timeline here. It had only been a few hours. No one had found any blood. No one had suggested any foul play. Everyone else in the family was desperately hoping to find a living, breathing woman. Yet her husband was already asking about dogs, specifically trained to smell dead bodies. If your pregnant wife just went missing for a few hours, would you immediately ask about cadaver dogs? Let me know in the comments. That single question was a massive red flag. It was the exact moment the police realized they were likely dealing with a homicide, not a missing person. They definitely did not randomly or unfairly target him. The defense strategy heavily relies on establishing a timeline that proves Laci was alive after Scott left the house. They constantly point to computer records from that morning. Their third major argument claims that someone was online shopping for a sunflower umbrella stand and a scarf at exactly 8:40 in the morning. They argue that since Laci loved sunflowers, she must have been the one sitting at the computer. Therefore, she was alive, and Scott could not possibly be the killer because he was already getting ready to leave. But this claim completely falls apart when you understand how the internet actually worked back in 2002. Back then, web browsers did not have sophisticated blockers. If you visited a single web page, a dozen advertisements would automatically open in the background. Every single one of those pop-up ads would register in the computer history as a visited website, even if the user never actually clicked on them or looked at them. When the digital forensics team examined the hard drive, they found the real truth. Just moments before those shopping websites appeared in the history log, Scott logged into his personal, password-protected email account. Immediately after those shopping sites registered in the background, the computer history showed someone checking the weather and tidal conditions at the Berkeley Marina. We know for a fact that Scott was the one going to the marina that day, not Laci. So, Laci was not casually shopping online. Scott was checking his email and the weather for his fishing trip while random advertisements loaded in the background. The morning computer alibi is a complete illusion. If the digital alibi is fake, the defense has to fall back on human memory. This brings us to their fourth major argument, which is probably the most famous piece of misinformation in this entire case. The defense loudly claims that 11 independent witnesses saw a pregnant woman walking a golden retriever through the neighborhood long after Scott had already driven away. If even one of those 11 people actually saw Laci, Scott is an innocent man. When Laci first went missing, her family and the police immediately put up missing person posters all over the city. Those posters stated that Laci was last seen wearing black pants and a white long-sleeve shirt. Suddenly, all 11 of these independent witnesses came forward claiming they saw a pregnant woman walking a dog. And every single one of them described her wearing exactly what was printed on the missing person flyer. They all said she was wearing black pants. The problem is, human memory is incredibly vulnerable to suggestion. People saw the flyer on the news, saw the description, and retroactively convinced themselves they saw Laci. We know they were wrong because of one undeniable piece of physical evidence. When Laci was finally found washed ashore months later, she was not wearing black pants. She was wearing beige pants. Furthermore, her doctor testified that Laci had stopped walking the dog weeks earlier because she was suffering from severe fatigue and dizzy spells. She was almost 8 months pregnant and simply did not have the physical energy to walk the dog that morning. The witness sightings were tragic cases of mistaken identity, driven by media exposure. Now, let us talk about the most shocking part of this entire witness situation. During the early days of the media frenzy, Scott hired a high-profile defense attorney named Mark Geragos. He went on every single television network shouting about these 11 witnesses. He promised the public that these people would completely destroy the case. He built a massive media campaign around the idea that his client was being framed while the real killer snatched Laci off the street during her morning walk. He looked straight into the cameras and promised he would bring these people to the stand to prove Scott was innocent. Yet, when the actual trial began and the stakes were life or death, Mark Geragos made a stunning decision. He never called a single one of those 11 witnesses to the stand. Not even a single one. He knew their stories contradicted each other and that the clothing mismatch would be destroyed by the prosecution during cross-examination. Which means, he absolutely knew the eyewitness sightings were completely useless in a real, functioning court of law. Why would a defense attorney hide his best witnesses from the jury? What do you guys honestly think about this tactic? The defense team frequently highlights their fifth major argument, constantly portraying Scott as a cooperative and completely honest husband who never lied to investigators about the core timeline. They claim his alibi was completely solid because he voluntarily told the police right away that he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina. According to his initial statement, he said it was a spontaneous decision made that very morning. He claimed he woke up, realized it was simply too cold to play golf, and suddenly decided to take his boat out to the bay instead. Let us look at the actual timeline and the physical evidence. When investigators dug into his actions leading up to that day, his spontaneous story completely unraveled. This was not a last-minute change of plans. Financial records discovered by the police proved that Scott had purchased a 2-day fishing license exactly 4 days before his wife disappeared. He specifically bought a license that was valid only for December 23rd and December 24th. In other words, he had planned this exact trip well in advance and deliberately lied to the police on the very first night to make it seem like a random coincidence that he was 90 miles away from his home. Furthermore, his actual fishing story made absolutely zero sense to anyone who actually understands the sport. Scott told detectives he was out on the bay fishing for sturgeon. However, sturgeon were not even in season during the month of December. It was illegal to fish for them at that time. On top of that, sturgeon are massive fish that can easily weigh over 100 pounds. When police searched his boat, they found he had the completely wrong gear. He had lightweight rods and artificial lures that were still sealed inside their packaging. You do not use a sealed, lightweight lure to catch a monster fish in the middle of winter. The entire fishing trip was an incredibly poor alibi meant to give him a reason to be at the exact location where the bodies of his wife and unborn son would later wash ashore. Meanwhile, the defense attempts to construct another fragile alibi using the family dog, a golden retriever named Mackenzie. A neighborhood resident found the dog wandering the street with its leash still attached and put the dog back into the yard at 10:18 in the morning. The defense leans heavily on the testimony of the regular neighborhood mail carrier. The mail carrier stated under oath that he delivered mail to the Peterson house at exactly 10:38 in the morning and did not hear the dog bark at all. According to the defense, the dog always barked at the mail carrier without fail. Therefore, they fiercely argue, if the dog did not bark at 10:38, it means Laci must have been out walking the dog at that exact moment, proving she was alive long after Scott had already left the neighborhood. But relying on a dog's daily barking habit as an ironclad legal alibi is incredibly flawed logic. Anyone who owns a pet knows their behavior is not a machine programmed to activate every single time a person walks by the property line. Sometimes they are deeply asleep. Sometimes they are completely distracted by something else in the yard. And then, there is a much darker and deeply disturbing possibility that we absolutely have to consider when looking at this timeline. At this point, I started questioning the actual psychology of a dog in this horrifying scenario. If Scott violently murdered Laci inside that house before he left, Mackenzie was likely present or very close by in the next room. Dogs are highly sensitive creatures. They deeply bond with their owners and react intensely to sudden stress, physical violence, and the scent of blood. If that golden retriever had just witnessed a violent attack on his pregnant owner, or simply sensed her sudden absence and the intense trauma lingering in the house, the dog would be in a state of severe emotional shock. A traumatized, terrified animal is not going to cheerfully run to the fence and bark at the mail carrier. The silence of the dog does not prove Laci was outside walking. It strongly suggests the dog was cowering in fear after a horrific event occurred right inside its own home. The defense took a traumatized animal's tragic silence and desperately tried to twist it into proof of life, ignoring the brutal reality completely. The defense team has always pushed their eighth major argument by focusing entirely on the exact physical dimensions of the watercraft. They loudly claim the 14-foot aluminum boat was simply too small and too unstable to transport a fully grown pregnant woman. They argue if he tried pushing her heavy weight over the side, the boat would capsize, sending him into the freezing bay waters. Because of that, they insist it is scientifically impossible for him to be the killer. They claim someone at the busy Berkeley Marina would have definitely noticed a dead body in such a tiny vessel. But the prosecution completely dismantled this illusion. During the trial, the jury went outside to conduct a field test using the exact boat. The prosecution placed a weighted mannequin matching the exact height and weight of Laci Peterson flat on the metal floor of the boat. When they placed a standard blue tarp over the mannequin, the shape completely disappeared below the rim of the boat. Anyone walking or driving by the marina that morning would only see a man towing a normal boat covered with a blue tarp. They would never see the terrible secret hidden underneath. Furthermore, the defense produced a ridiculous video of a man intentionally trying to flip a similar boat by standing on the edge. But experienced fishermen know you simply slide a heavy weight over the side to prevent capsizing. Sturgeon fishermen regularly pull in massive fish weighing well over 100 pounds without ever flipping their small boats. The boat was perfectly capable of completing the terrible task. This disturbing realization leads us directly into their ninth major argument, which deeply revolves around the infamous missing concrete. When forensic investigators executed a search warrant at the storage warehouse Scott rented for his business, they found a receipt proving he bought a 90-pound bag of concrete mix just a few short days before Laci vanished. When the police initially asked him about this specific purchase, Scott pointed directly to one single homemade concrete anchor sitting casually inside the boat. He confidently claimed he used the entire bag of concrete to make that one specific anchor for his upcoming fishing trip. But when the forensic investigators placed that specific anchor on a scale, it weighed barely 8 pounds. Even if we are incredibly generous with the math, this simple equation exposes a massive, undeniable problem for the defense. 90 pounds minus 8 pounds leaves exactly 82 pounds of concrete completely unaccounted for. What happened next was a rapid series of terrible and clumsy lies. When police pressed him on exactly where the rest of the cement went, Scott could not keep his story straight at all. First, he claimed he just threw the rest of the heavy bag away in the local garbage. Then, he abruptly changed his entire story and claimed he dumped the dry powder into a random hole in the dirt right outside his warehouse doors. The defense even tried to show a blurry picture of some white dust on the ground to definitively prove his innocence. But anyone with basic common sense can look at that photograph and easily see it is absolutely not 82 pounds of solid concrete. The prosecution argued that Scott used those missing 82 pounds to secretly cast 4 separate concrete weights inside small plastic buckets, which he then tied securely to Laci to sink her body to the bottom of the San Francisco Bay, which tells us he methodically planned to erase her existence entirely, long before she ever went missing. The physical evidence completely backed up this dark theory. When crime scene technicians vacuumed his warehouse floor, the bed of his pickup truck, and the inside of the aluminum boat, they did not just find a tiny little bit of stray dust. They found distinct ring marks on the floor of his warehouse, perfectly matching the exact size of plastic pitchers. They found heavy concrete dust covering the bed of his truck. And most importantly, they found significant traces of concrete dust transferred directly into the bottom of the aluminum boat. You do not get heavy concrete dust inside a floating boat if you simply dumped the extra powder into the dirt outside your warehouse. The concrete was mixed, transported in that truck, and loaded onto that boat. Where do you think the missing 80 pounds of concrete went? Is it just a coincidence? Let me know in the comments. The 10th major argument from the defense team, and probably the one they use to manipulate public sympathy the most, revolves entirely around his highly publicized affair with a massage therapist named Amber Frey. The defense attorneys and his fierce supporters constantly argue that the jury was blinded by moral outrage. They aggressively push the narrative that the media turned him into a national villain simply because he was a terrible husband who cheated on his pregnant wife. They complain that the justice system unfairly punished him for his personal sins. They argue that being a liar and an adulterer does not make you a cold-blooded murderer. And if we look at that statement in a completely and absolutely right vacuum, they are right. Millions of ordinary people have affairs every single year, and they do not end up on death row for murder. But the prosecution never argued that he should go to prison just for cheating. He was not convicted because of moral prejudice. He was convicted because the affair with Amber Frey definitively proved his dark motive and established a terrifying timeline of premeditation. This is the part I couldn't get past. When you listen to the actual wiretapped phone calls and read the timeline of his relationship with Amber, it stops being a story about a simple affair and turns into a documented countdown to a murder. Amber Frey had absolutely no idea he was married. She was introduced to him by a mutual friend in late November, and he told both of them he was a single man looking for a serious relationship. He went on multiple weekend dates with her, picked up her 18-month-old daughter from daycare, and even bought them a Christmas tree. He was actively building a completely new life while his real pregnant wife waited at home. But on December 8th, everything suddenly threatened to collapse and ruin his secret double life. On that specific Sunday, the mutual friend who introduced them found out that he was actually married to Laci. She furiously called him and threatened to expose his massive secret to Amber. He begged the friend not to say anything, promising he would confess the entire truth to Amber himself. And this is important. He did not go to Amber and admit he was having an affair behind his living wife's back. Instead, on December 9th, he sat down with Amber, started crying hysterically on command, and told her a completely different, horrifying lie. He looked her directly in the eyes and told her that he had been married, but he had recently lost his wife. He wept openly and told her that this upcoming holiday was going to be the very first Christmas without her. He made this dramatic, deeply emotional confession exactly 15 days before Laci actually disappeared from their home. He did not say he was getting a divorce. He did not say he was unhappily married. He specifically used the word lost and framed himself as a grieving widower facing his first holiday alone. He practically wrote his own premeditation script and handed it directly to the prosecution. But the evidence gets even darker when you look at his digital footprint from that exact same time frame. That's when the computer forensics team found something that completely sealed his fate. On December 8th, the exact same day he was confronted by the friend and realized he was about to lose his new girlfriend, he logged onto his personal computer. He did not search for divorce lawyers. He did not search for marriage counseling or apartment rentals. He searched for the specific tidal patterns and water currents in the San Francisco Bay. He was researching the exact body of water where he would later claim he went fishing, and the exact same area where the bodies of Laci and his unborn son would eventually wash ashore months later. He was looking up how the underwater currents moved on the very day he decided to tell his mistress that his wife was already dead. The defense wants you to believe this is all just a series of unfortunate coincidences and moral failings. But the timeline is undeniably clear. He established his motive, declared his wife dead, and researched her watery grave 2 full weeks before she vanished into thin air. If you heard someone say they lost their wife weeks before she actually vanished, what would you think? Comment below with your honest thoughts today. The defense team and the documentary makers love to introduce a terrifying alternate theory to create reasonable doubt. Their 11th major argument relies on the tragic case of another pregnant woman named Evelyn Hernandez. She vanished from the exact same region of California just a few months before Laci disappeared. Her body also washed up in the San Francisco Bay Area. The defense heavily pushes the idea that a sadistic serial killer was actively hunting pregnant women in the area, and the police completely ignored this massive lead because they were too obsessed with Scott. They frame Evelyn as the ultimate proof that a random stranger abducted Laci while she was walking her dog. At the same time, when you actually pull the investigative files for Evelyn Hernandez, the serial killer conspiracy completely falls apart. Evelyn was not abducted by a random stranger or a satanic cult wandering the streets. The reality of her case is actually eerily similar to Laci, but not in the way the defense wants you to believe. Evelyn was having an affair with a married man. She became pregnant with his child. He did not want to leave his wife or take financial responsibility for the new baby. He was the primary suspect in her disappearance. The Modesto police and the federal investigators did not ignore her case at all. They thoroughly checked for any possible connection between the two women and found absolutely nothing linking them. The only real connection is the tragic statistical reality that the leading cause of death for pregnant women is homicide, usually committed by their intimate partners. The defense weaponized another woman's tragedy to create a fake serial killer phantom. But the most deceptive manipulation in the entire media campaign is their 12th major argument. If you watch the documentary series, they will look you dead in the eye and repeatedly claim there is absolutely zero forensic or biological evidence in this entire case. They insist the police never found a single drop of blood, no DNA, and no physical proof tying Scott to the murder. This specific claim is the cornerstone of the entire innocence movement. It sounds incredibly convincing until you actually read the official crime scene evidence logs presented to the jury. The reason this matters is because the documentary blatantly lied by omission. There absolutely was biological evidence. During the investigation, crime scene technicians conducted a massive search of Scott's warehouse and his aluminum fishing boat. Tucked away inside that boat, investigators found a pair of rusty needle nose pliers. When they examined those pliers closely, they found a single, distinct human hair clamped tightly inside the teeth of the tool. Forensic experts tested the mitochondrial DNA of that specific hair, and it was a direct match to Laci. Let us think about the massive implications of this physical evidence. Scott secretly bought that aluminum boat just a couple of weeks before the murder. He hid the boat in his warehouse. Laci did not even know the boat existed. She had never seen it, she had never been to the warehouse, and she had never, ever stepped foot inside that small watercraft. Yet, her hair was found crushed inside a rusty tool hidden at the bottom of it. A boat. He specifically towed to the exact body of water where her remains were eventually discovered. The defense tried to argue that the wind might have blown the hair from his jacket onto the pliers, but the hair was not just resting on top of the tool. It was physically clamped and wedged inside the closed teeth of the pliers. This was absolutely the ultimate smoking gun of the prosecution's entire forensic presentation. It completely shattered the popular myth that absolutely no biological evidence existed in this highly publicized investigation. The television series deliberately built a massive false narrative around the ridiculous idea of a perfectly clean crime scene. They very intentionally erased the most damning piece of physical evidence from their final script because they desperately wanted to manipulate public opinion and create a fake underdog story. They fully knew that if they actually showed the jury's verified findings on television, the audience would immediately realize that he was absolutely guilty beyond any shadow of a doubt. It is incredibly disturbing to actually witness such blatant, cruel dishonesty in true crime media today. The documentary completely left out the victim's hair on the boat. Why do you really think they intentionally hid this from viewers? When I first started looking into this case, I will be completely honest with you. I watched that documentary, and I actually thought Scott Peterson might be an innocent man. The producers did such a fantastic job of editing the narrative. They highlighted the missing concrete, the alleged 11 witnesses, and the supposedly non-existent forensic evidence so well that I fell right into their trap. But then, I opened the actual trial transcripts. I read through the cross-examinations, the police reports, and the massive evidence logs. What struck me here was the overwhelming feeling of pure anger. I realized I had been completely manipulated. The defense took 12 separate arguments and twisted every single one of them to create an illusion of reasonable doubt. They ignored the fact that his morning timeline was a proven lie. They intentionally erased the biological evidence from the rusty pliers on the boat. They completely minimized the devastating reality of his chilling premeditation. They tried to sell us a fiction where a man who researched water currents before his wife disappeared was just an unlucky victim of bad circumstances. The legal team defending him knew what they were doing when they presented these 12 flawed points to the public. They banked on the fact that the average person watching television at home would never take the time to read thousands of pages of court documents. They understood that if they just repeated the same lies over and over again on national television, people would believe them. They weaponized our natural empathy. We all want to believe the justice system makes mistakes, but in this case, the only mistake was believing a word that came out of his mouth. This brings us to a much larger and much darker problem we are facing right now. We are currently living in the absolute peak of the true crime entertainment era. We consume these horrific tragedies like they are just another serialized drama on our television screens. But the extreme danger here is that a lie, if it is repeated enough times on popular podcasts and massive internet forums, eventually starts to look exactly like the truth. When documentary filmmakers prioritize shocking twists and high viewer ratings over actual established facts, they actively and purposefully distort justice. They take a convicted, cold-blooded killer and rebrand him as a misunderstood underdog who was wronged by the system. And in doing so, they completely trample on the unimaginable pain of the real victims left behind. Think about Sharon Rocha, the grieving mother of Laci Peterson. For over 2 long decades, she has had to endure the agonizing loss of her beautiful daughter and her unborn grandson, Connor. She sat through a grueling 6-month trial, listening to the gruesome details of how her daughter was violently thrown to the dark bottom of the freezing ocean. She had to listen to the man she once trusted as a son-in-law lie repeatedly to the world. And now, every few years, she has to watch a brand new media campaign try to turn her daughter's murderer into a sympathetic celebrity victim. She has to watch the internet endlessly debate his innocence based on fabricated evidence and carefully edited television shows. It is a cruel and unusual punishment that never actually ends for her broken family. Every time a new podcast or documentary releases a misleading episode, the family is forced to relive the worst trauma of their entire lives all over again just to satisfy public entertainment. We have walked through the 12 major arguments used by the defense. We have looked closely at the missing concrete dust, the fake computer logs, the impossible witness sightings, the broken timeline, and the very real forensic evidence that the media intentionally tried to hide from you. We have seen how a completely circumstantial case can actually be airtight when you connect the undeniable facts together. The truth is often buried under layers of highly funded public relations campaigns. I want to hear from you. Now that you have seen the real court files, not just the Netflix or A&E version, where do you stand? Have these unedited facts changed your mind about his guilt? Please share your thoughts down below. Scott Peterson is locked away, but the campaign to free him is still spending millions. It makes you wonder, in today's world, if you have enough money to buy the narrative, can you eventually buy your own truth?
Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. If you found this investigation helpful, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analysis videos. Stay safe and see you again.